Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 790, and today is April 25th, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. A lot to talk about on today's show, so I'm going to jump right into it. Just want to remind people to share the show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. I repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show. It's up anywhere you could listen to audio podcasts. And of course, the best place to follow me to find all my work is on Twitter at Kyle Anzalone _. Don't forget to subscribe to the all-new Kyle Anzalone show. This week, I interviewed Ken Silva and Keaton Weiss. So two really good interviews that you definitely want to check out if you haven't already. It is the first link in the show notes page, so very easy to find. Let's get into the news today. All right, first up here, this article I wrote yesterday at the Libertarian Institute. NATO chief to lobby Trump not to pressure Ukraine to make peace with Russia. So the head of the North Atlantic Alliance is traveling to the U.S. for meetings with top officials in the Donald Trump administration. Secretary General Mark Rutte is expected to push the White House not to force Ukraine into a peace deal with Russia. So according to the Financial Times, I think it's actually Rutte, will urge President Trump's administration not to force Ukraine to accept a peace deal against its will. During meetings with embattled Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. Trump and Rubio recently stated they had expected both Russia and Ukraine to quickly move towards a peace agreement. The White House proposed a deal that would require Kiev to recognize Moscow's permanent control over Ukrainian territory held by the Russian military, including the Crimean Peninsula. Now, importantly, that didn't include total recognition. It was like de facto, right? So Ukraine doesn't have to sign and say, oh, we now know that Crimea is a part of Russia. They just have to recognize and stop trying to take back that territory. So on Wednesday, Trump slammed the Ukrainian President Zelensky for rejecting the idea of, peace in Ukraine. He said on Truth Social, this statement is very harmful to peace negotiations with Russia in that Crimea was lost years ago under the auspices of President Barack Hussein Obama, and it's not even a point of discussion. Zelensky can have peace or he can fight another 3 years before losing the whole country. We are very close to a deal, but the man has no cards to play and he should now finally get it done. A NATO official told the Financial Times the key message that Rutte is making the Americans understand is what's at stake. Throughout the conflict, Western NATO leaders have claimed that they are defending international world order by arming and supporting Ukraine. However, many Western countries, primarily the U.S., have engaged in a number of unlawful invasions in recent decades. Additionally, NATO states have backed Israel as it conducted a genocide in Gaza. So obviously this isn't about upholding world order, it's just about weakening Russia and fighting a proxy war there. Trump has raised the issue of international law and said his priority is ending the war to stop people from dying. Rutte is not the only European leader planning to lobby Trump to continue the proxy war against Russia. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen plans to speak with Trump at Pope Francis's funeral on Saturday. Now, this I actually think is fantastic. I could imagine that Trump probably doesn't like this woman very much, and her lecturing him may cause Trump to actually do the opposite if she, goes a little heavy on it. So I'm all for this meeting with Ursula. I think this could actually really move us closer towards ending the war in Ukraine. All right, so the Ukrainian foreign minister responded to Trump's recent peace proposal by saying that Kiev cannot make concessions and the U.S. must increase pressure on Russia. On Thursday, Trump denounced a Russian strike on Kiev. He said, I'm not happy with the Russian strikes on Kiev, not necessary and very bad timing. He wrote on Truth Social, Vladimir, stop. 5,000 soldiers a week are dying. Let's get a peace deal done. And so I think Trump does understand that When Russia does carry out attacks, particularly anything targeting major Ukrainian cities, civilian infrastructure, there is a boil up of tensions. And so this is interesting. A few days ago, I was pretty pessimistic that we are going to see a Ukraine deal get done under Trump, talking about how we're going to wash our hands of the negotiations. That's what Rubio was saying last weekend if something doesn't get done very quickly. Now, this seemed to me that nothing's going to get done, and if nothing gets done, the proxy war just continues to drag on. But it seems that maybe the Trump administration is really ready to try to ramp up pressure on the Ukrainians, which would mean taking away military arms at the very least, maybe the intelligence sharing as well. And if that's the case, the Ukrainians will either be forced to make a deal or will just lose the war at a faster pace until they're forced to make a deal at the barrel of a Russian gun at the negotiating table. So hopefully Ukraine does decide to make a deal, but we will see how this goes over the next weekend. The problem with Donald Trump is things could change really quickly. All right, next up here, U.S. war games simulate full-scale battle with China in the Philippines. So the U.S. kicked off its largest annual military drills alongside the Philippines on Monday, simulating a full-on war with China. A total of 17,000 troops from 20 countries participated in the drills dubbed Balkatan 2025, including 9,000 American soldiers and 5,000 Filipino servicemen. U.S. Marine Corps Forces Pacific Commander Lieutenant General James Glynn said that this year's drills will showcase a full battle test, the purposeful integration of real-world security situations relevant to the region with live, virtual, and constructive training opportunities that will give the Philippines and the U.S. the collective opportunity to demonstrate capabilities across all domains, across all service and forces. The statement from the Philippines military likewise said the exercises would simulate a full-scale battle scenario. Many nations send observers to the Philippines for the drills. For the first time, Japanese soldiers were full participants in the war games. So General Romero Browner, the chief of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, noted that Balkatan would take place in the northern Philippines near the South China Sea and Taiwan. He said, across the vibrant, it spans from Luzon, Palawan, and Vilcas and Mindanao, we will address our readiness in all four domains. And these are the northern provinces of the Philippines that he was listing off there. Apologies for the ones I mispronounced. So, the South China Sea and Taiwan are flashpoints in a potential conflict between the U.S. and China, which sees the island as part of its own sovereignty. A press release from the U.S. Navy explained that the war games were proof that Washington would honor its defense treaty with Manila. Balkatan is a testament to the ironclad alliance and enduring friendship between the Philippines and the United States, it said. Chinese and Philippines vessels have collided around disputed rocks and reefs in the South China Sea on several occasions in recent years. While the incidents have not led to direct hostilities, there have been I think people injured when the boats collided. Apparently, some Filipino lost a thumb to a Chinese machete at one point, but it's not as if these are two warships firing on each other, right? These are, relatively speaking, just minor little collisions. So Washington often restates its pledge to go to war on Manila's behalf as a warning to Beijing not to attack the Philippines or interfere with the Filipino-claimed rocks and reefs in the middle of the South China Sea. So along with additional participants in the drills, Balkatan 2025 will feature integrated air and missile defenses for the first time. This includes one of the first live-fire tests of the Marine Air Defense Integrated System, a short-range anti-drone program. During Balkatan 2024, the U.S. deployed the Typhoon launcher, a covert system concealed in a 40-foot shipping container, and fires Tomahawk and SM-6 missiles. to the Philippines. In a major provocation to Beijing, Washington kept this system in the country's north, where it was capable of striking Taiwan and even mainland China. A Typhoon launcher will again be deployed for this year's Bilkatan. So I think, this is major. Now, it doesn't seem that China is going to issue a major response, and that they're not looking to increase and inflame tensions with the U.S. at this time, which is good news, right? I think with all the tariff stuff going on, we don't need additional provocations between the U.S. and China. But I really just want to go over all this in case things do really start to ratchet up, that we remember these war games were a big part of the reason why. All right, next up here, we're going into the Middle East, and this is just all really terrible news. All right, so starting off with this one from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com on April 23rd. Israel's Ben-Gvir says U.S. Republicans support his plan to bomb food in Gaza. So the Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir is visiting the U.S. and said on Wednesday during a meeting in Mar-a-Lago, he received support from Republican leadership for his plan to bomb food and aid warehouses in Gaza. So Ben-Gvir wrote on X, I had the honor and the privilege to meet senior officials of the Republican Party at Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate. They expressed support for my very clear position on how to act in Gaza, and the food and aid warehouses should be bombed in order to create military and political pressure to bring our hostages home safely. Ben-Gvir has been calling for Israel to bomb humanitarian aid that was allowed into Gaza during the short-lived ceasefire. He said in March, the government must also order the bombing of all aid stockpiles that have accumulated in Gaza in enormous quantities during and before the ceasefire. The Trump administration has strongly backed Israel's blockade on aid and the collective punishment of the civilian population in Gaza, a clear war crime under international law. In another post on Wednesday, Ben-Gvir, the leader of the far-right Jewish Power Party, vowed not a single gram of food will enter Gaza until Israeli hostages are released. And of course, the problem here is that Hamas is offering to release the hostages. All they want is Israel to stop attacking Gaza in exchange, and the Israelis are refusing to do so. And so Ben-Gvir is saying, oh, we have to bomb the aid, we have to bomb the food, unless Hamas releases the hostages, and Hamas saying, okay, we'll release the hostages, just end the military campaign, and Israel's refusing to do so. So this is really disgusting, and I hope Ben-Gvir is maybe somehow lying or obscuring the truth about the Republican support for this, but my sense is that he's probably not. That a lot of these Republicans, and a lot of the Democrats too, like I'm sure John Fetterman, if tomorrow Israel went and bombed every aid warehouse that was left in Gaza, John Fetterman would stand up, applaud, and defend that action. I 100% guarantee it, no doubt in my mind. And so there are definitely a lot of Republicans in that category as well. I'm sure some of them are in the administration, particularly Mike Huckabee, David Friedman, come to mind as just absolute lunatics when it comes to their support for Israel, where you show them a picture of a child that has been killed in an Israeli airstrike. And even if this was a strike on a hospital, a strike on, effectively an orphanage, a school, somewhere where it's clear that this had nothing to do with Hamas, that Israel was just bombing civilian targets with American bombs for the purpose of thinning the population of Gaza and causing immense suffering among the Palestinian people. These members of our government, these members of Congress are going to say it's all Hamas's fault. And if only Hamas released the captives, then Israel would just stop this and everybody in Gaza could live in peace. It's all Hamas's fault. And then Hamas will come out and say, okay, we'll release the captives. And they'll go, oh, that's just Hamas propaganda. Hamas is just trying to make Israel the bad guy when Israel's not the bad guy. It's all Hamas's fault. So obviously, it's not all Hamas's fault. When Israel bombs civilian targets, that's Israel's fault. When they do it with American bombs, that's also America's fault. Now, look, Hamas does bear responsibility and a role in this war, But to just claim that everything is Hamas's fault is the worst kind of PR, completely absurd. And it sets the stage for somebody like a complete lunatic, a genocidal freak like Itmar Ben-Gvir, somebody who should be shamed, who should not be welcomed in the US, right? Somebody like that is going to be given the cover to advocate for and maybe actually get this plan put in place where we're bombing the food. When we bomb the food, who's going to suffer? Little children will starve to death. I don't know if people really are thinking about like what it means for a child to not eat for weeks or to only get one tiny meal every day for a month, and then just their body doesn't have enough. They waste away. They have these tiny scrawny little arms and legs, these protruding bellies. I'm sure they cry and beg their parents for food for day after day after day. The doctors, the nurses, the humanitarian aid workers, the rest of the population in Gaza sees these children suffering and crying and begging for food. And this fat Ben-Gvir is rubbing his hands together, talking about bombing and taking food away from children. He is a sick freak who we should all hate. I saw a protester who confronted him while he was in the United States shouted, "My grandfathers were in the Holocaust and they hate you." And I wish everybody would just tell him how much they hate him, because he is a sick and just reprehensible individual, and that he's, chumming around the United States with our elected leaders is an indictment of most of our government. So, Ben-Gvir said, "I see reports about the debate over who should deliver humanitarian aid into Gaza. Well, this is a fundamentally foolish debate because not a single gram of aid should enter Gaza, the entire strip, as long as the hostages are held there, not by some external organization nor by the IDF. This is a situation today, and only by maintaining it will it be possible to bring Hamas to its knees and to free our hostages by force." So medical officials in Gaza have been warning about the impact of the severe food shortages are having on children. Dr. Ahmed Al-Farah, the director of the Tahrir Hospital at the Nasser Medical Complex in Gaza, said on Wednesday that the children are suffering from malnutrition. Children in the strip are in the most severe stages of malnutrition, and it's difficult to follow up medically due to the shortage of therapeutic drugs and baby formula. Al-Farah said in a press release posted by Gaza's health ministry, which included photos of emaciated children. Ben-Gvir, one of the most extreme members of the Israeli government, is an outspoken proponent of ethnic cleansing of Gaza. And so when he's saying, and I'm sure he's telling this to the American officials who maybe buy it, that we need to do this to punish Gaza, Ben-Gvir doesn't care about Hamas. He wants all of the Palestinians out, and probably he prefers them dead. And, this is just utterly disgusting, and I can't believe it's happening. All right, so next up here, this one again from Dade to Camp. Trump told Congress he wants to build up U.S. forces in the Middle East to protect Israel. So the White House on Tuesday published a letter President Trump sent to Congress on March 25th that he was ordering a buildup of U.S. military forces in the Middle East to protect Israel and U.S. assets in the region. In the letter, the House Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate President Pro Tem Chuck Grassley, Trump said he was writing to inform them of the situation in Yemen and the broader Middle East. First, I directed the Department of Defense to move additional equipment for combat into the Middle East to enhance defensive capabilities available to the United States and facilitate necessary military actions, the president wrote. Now, I want to mention something here that I do find interesting. Like, deploying a THAAD battery would, maybe help Israel defend to some degree an Iranian attack, but putting more military assets in the Middle East, sending a second aircraft carrier strike group, is also putting more U.S. forces in the range of Iranian missiles and drones and things like that. And so while this could be maybe in the eyes of the administration as something that's going to help Israel in a potential future war. It also puts a lot of U.S. troops in jeopardy, and I think in some respects may make a U.S.-Iranian war slightly less likely, just because the more U.S. troops that there are in the region, the more there's gotta be people within the Pentagon saying that we can't strike Iran with tens of thousands of, maybe close to hundreds of thousands of American troops within the range of Iranian bombs, missiles, drones. It would just be utterly foolish to do so. That doesn't mean it won't happen because the administration is utterly foolish. It just means that there's got to be more voices of dissent. Tulsi Gabbard, J.D. Vance, maybe Pete Hegseth are competent enough to understand how many U.S. troops' lives will be in danger if we do strike Iran with tens of thousands of American troops in countries that are adjacent to Iran. All right, so next up here, Syrian leader Shara willing to normalize relations with Israel. So Syrian's leader Ahmed al-Shara, or better known as Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, the leader of al-Qaeda in Syria, reportedly expresses openness to normalizing relations with Israel under certain circumstances, ending decades of acrimony between the two neighboring states. Shara reportedly discussed the matter with Rep. Corey Mills during his Mills' visit to Syria. The exact terms of this offer weren't made public, though Mills said that Shara also gave him a note to deliver to President Trump. Syria has been keen to get international sanctions eased, and that's likely to be a top condition for such a move. And so, again, this is an al-Qaeda-led state, right? We have Bashar al-Assad, who no doubt was a dictator, no doubt did some cruel things to his own people, but in no way, shape, or form presented any kind of threat to the United States of America. The U.S. had nothing to worry about from Syria when Bashar al-Assad was in charge. Now that we again have Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, a veteran of the Iraq War who fought against American troops in Iraq, is now in control of Syria. Now we're going to lift sanctions. Now we're going to normalize relations. This is insanity and stupidity. Hopefully, this was one of the reasons I was optimistic about Tulsi Gabbard becoming Director of National Intelligence, because this has been one of her beats. This has been something that she really did understand. The difference between a Sunni and a Shia. The difference between a jihadist and a militant. Shara Jolani is a jihadist. He is an al-Qaeda man. And sure, he cleaned up, he groomed his beard a little bit. He threw on a shirt, and in coordination with al-Qaeda central leadership, said he was no longer a member of al-Qaeda. But he only did that in order to get international recognition and support so he could launch his offensive to take over Damascus, which he did. And now he's getting more international support. I really hope that this doesn't go through. I'm almost always, in all cases, in favor of the U.S. normalizing relations with all countries, whether that be Iran or Russia or China or Venezuela or North Korea. But in this case, you have a jihadist who was only put in control of Syria with U.S. support. And I don't think we should normalize or encourage other countries to trade with the HTS-led Syria. Once a new government's in charge of that state, maybe we could look at it, but this is just really bad news. Okay. So moving on here, Rubio says Iran must stop nuclear enrichment, a condition Tehran says is unacceptable. And so when we talk about what's going to unfold in the Middle East over the next year, one of the big points of contention is going to be what happens during the U.S.-Iranian nuclear negotiations. It's possible that Trump is willing to present something reasonable that the Iranians will agree to, and that will take the potential for a U.S.-Iranian war completely off the table. I think that is extremely unlikely for a number of reasons. The primary one for the Trump administration, I do think, is that Donald Trump isn't going to get a deal better than the JCPOA, the 2015 Iran nuclear deal that was signed under Barack Obama that Trump exited in 2018. If Trump isn't going to get a better deal, I highly doubt he signs the deal. Issue number two, also really serious, is that the one thing the Israelis do not want in the Middle East is an Iran nuclear deal. Now, people will say, oh, a nuclear deal could assure Israel that Iran isn't going to build a nuclear bomb. Guess what? Israel knows Iran isn't trying to build a nuclear bomb. Netanyahu has been saying for 2 decades that the Ayatollah is 2 weeks away from having a nuclear weapon. Well, if the Ayatollah he has to know that if that was true 20 years ago, that Iran is either not trying to build a nuclear weapon or, he's just straight lying. And so obviously Netanyahu knows that the Iranians aren't trying to build a nuclear weapon. But why does Israel keep saying time and time again that Iran is trying to build a nuclear weapon? Because that's crucial to their propaganda narrative and their hold over the United States, right? We have Israel, which we all agree in the United States for some absurd reason must be protected by the United States at even to the detriment of our own national security, of our own well-being, of our own finances, of our own need for munitions and bombs and air defense systems like the THAAD. We will sacrifice all that to Israel because Israel is under a threat from Iran, and that, these crazy Muslims just want to wipe out the one Jewish state in the world. That's the narrative that Americans are led to believe. And so if a nuclear deal is signed, then that takes that propaganda off the table. The Israelis want to be able to agitate and to say, we're so concerned about war with Iran. Why? Because last weekend, the U.S., in preparation for a potential attack on Iran, sent Israel 9 plane loads of bunker-busting bombs. Why does Israel need these bombs? Because they're using them in Gaza. Even though they're not using them on bunkers in Gaza, they're using them on tents and hospitals and schools. The goal in Gaza is ethnic cleansing, is genocide. Then Israel needs a lot of bombs to accomplish that. And the way they could guarantee future shipments of weapons from the U.S. is to have this big Iranian threat on the horizon. So I don't think Israel will ever allow the U.S. to agree to a nuclear deal with Iran. I think if talks really start moving in the right direction, you're going to see Israeli assassinations in Iran, sabotage, other Israeli attacks on Iran, to try to make it so the Iranians don't want to negotiate on the terms currently being put forward. So that's the bad news. I think a deal is unlikely with this enrichment term in place. That being said, the State Department official that Trump picked to lead technical talks with Iran is Michael Anton, and I don't know a lot about this guy, but the Israeli press freaked out. They were saying, oh, this guy's an isolationist. This guy doesn't like war. He could just give the whole farm away to Iran, which I'm thinking isn't true. I don't think that this is going to be a major story, but that the Israelis are freaking out over Iran may be a good sign. All right, so last story up here today. 3 Senate Democrats challenged Hegseth over civilian casualties in Yemen. 3 Senate Democrats have sent a letter to Secretary of State Pete Hegseth to challenge him over the high civilian casualty rate in the U.S. bombing campaign in Yemen, which the Trump administration launched on March 15th. U.S. airstrikes in Yemen have hit residential buildings and other civilian infrastructure, taking a heavy toll on civilians. According to the Yemen Data Project, at least 63 civilians were killed, including 31 children, and 150 were injured by U.S. strikes from March to April 15th. On April 17th, a U.S. airstrike hit the Ras Isa fuel port and became the deadliest of the conflict, killing 80 people, mainly civilian workers and paramedics, according to the Yemen Health Ministry. Aid groups warned the strikes on fuel infrastructure could push millions of Yemenis already facing food shortages into famine. And so we are just willing to do absolutely horrible things in the Middle East, and almost all of it is for the benefit of Israel. All right, everybody, that's where I'm wrapping up the show for today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll be back with the Kyle Anzalone Show and Conflicts of Interest next week. Be sure you subscribe to the show that you're tuned in, and follow me on Twitter for all the articles that I write. Thanks, everyone.